Welcome.
Okay. Hello everyone. Welcome to the Interintellect SuperSalon about raising free-range children. My name is Maria Górska-Piszek, and today I am joined by the Interintellect community and our very special guest, Lenore Skenazy. So Lenore is a journalist, an author, childhood freedom advocate, and also famously titled The America's Worst Mom, and we'll get back to that later. So Lenore is today here to answer all of our questions. And I prepared a bunch of questions to kick off this conversation, but this isn't a regular interview. Like, this is a free conversation with the whole community. So if you have something to add or some follow-up questions, feel free to join at whatever time. And if this doesn't happen naturally, you can use the raised hand emoji in the reactions bar and then lower it like this. So yeah, Lenore, thank you for joining us. It's so good to finally meet you.
Yeah, ditto. Okay, actually, I was just going to look at just one person at a time, but no, it's more fun looking at everybody. So hi.
Hi, so maybe let's start at the beginning. Right. And I think like everyone in this room already heard this subway story about like how you let your son ride on the subway and then became America's Worst Mom on like a few different TV channels. And I'm wondering like how people in your life reacted to this, like your friends, your family, the moms of other children at your kids' school. Like, what did they think about it? Like, did they think like you're completely irresponsible, or did they see this like as a completely normal thing? And also I'm wondering, like, when you talk to parents of young children now, like, are their reactions different, or are they still pretty much the same?
I'm trying to remember, you know, the 9-year-old who took the subway is 24 at the moment and in Hong Kong. So it's been a while. I do remember that he had one friend who was a year older than him. And after, you know, I sort of became known for letting Izzy walk to and from school, she said that her son could walk to and from school if Izzy walked with him together. And that's what I hope for the whole world, you know, for like somebody who believes in it to find somebody else who's sort of on the fence and say, well, let's have our kids do this together, because it is so much easier and more fun when you start giving your kids some independence. So you know, friends and family were sort of amazed that anybody cared. Nobody was more amazed than me. But people who knew me didn't think that I was suddenly this, you know, crazy, awful parent. And my sister, who I remember at the time, we were driving together. My book was just getting published. It was like a year after the whole subway incident. And we were in her car, and I'm never in a car because I live in New York City and we take the subway everywhere. But we were driving in California where my sister lives. And as we were driving along, my kids were in the back seat, and I just gently pressed the little button that locks all the doors, you know, not even mentioning it, just talking as we're driving along. My sister's doing the driving. And then a few minutes later, also not mentioning it, my sister unlocks all the doors. And so I was like, okay, what's going on? And she said, well, I noticed you locked the doors. And I said, yeah, because, you know, we're so, you know, my kids are young and I don't want them accidentally opening the back door because they think it's the window or something. So just to be safe, because I am a nervous mom, I locked all the doors. And she said, well, I unlocked them because if we're in an accident, we want the emergency crew to be able to get in and take them out. I was like, wow. And here I am, the most, you know, lackadaisical, devil-may-care mom. And I come from such safety-loving stock that we were both thinking about the door situation as we drove along the highway, which, you know, kids weren't going to open the doors and we weren't going to get in an accident. So in that sense, it was kind of funny to become known as such a brave mom when the only thing that was slightly out of step with the culture is trusting my kids around strangers and trusting them without my eyes on them. That's sort of become abnormal, even more so in the ensuing decade and a half. But I don't think anybody suddenly thought that I was a different person. Just kind of funny. So
yeah, so it makes me wonder. So you mentioned locking and unlocking car doors. So out of all the possible terrible things that can happen to our kids, like we're still going to prevent some of them. And I'm wondering, like, what's your decision process when you make that choice? Like, which disasters are worth trying to prevent and which disasters aren't worth trying to prevent? Because, like right now, like we have all these possibilities to try and control every single minute of our children's lives. And some of these actions, like using a car seat or like locking the car doors, might have like a really outstanding impact on how the kid is going to survive. And some other actions, like not necessarily. So like, how do you tell the difference?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have a foolproof method. And in fact, the idea that there is a foolproof method is one of the things that's driving us crazy, because we think, oh, if I only do everything right, my kid will be absolutely 100% safe, and one deviation and all bets are off. Something like a car seat or locking the doors, or even a seat belt for us adults, which I highly, highly recommend, doesn't change the experience, right? Either way, you're going to be in a car. So your kid might as well be safe in the car, right? While they're driving, and you might as well be safe as well. Choosing to drive a kid versus letting them walk someplace, or choosing to accompany them all the time or watch over them all the time when they could be having a little bit of adventure or organizing a game on their own, that does change the experience. And in a situation where it's literally extremely safe, but not perfectly safe, the thing that I think our culture has the hardest time, and I realize I'm speaking to so many different countries now that it's probably not the same universally, but certainly in the United States and Canada and some of the other English-speaking countries, which are all that I'm familiar with, there is this creeping new idea that, first of all, you should know the exact odds. You should know, like down to the decimal, exactly how safe something is. And then if it doesn't hit 100.000, then it's unsafe. And I don't know how we got to this point exactly. I mean, I'll talk about it, but I really, the thing that wakes me up in the morning and keeps me interested in this topic is that when my mom was sending me to school, walking by myself at age 5, and obviously 6, 7, 8 and up, and then waiting at the bus stop by myself in the freezing cold Chicago winters where I grew up, she wasn't making a calculation. She wasn't going, oh, I'm so nervous, and what if she dies? I'll never forgive myself, but the odds are, pretty good. Once you start deciding, like, do you accept the idea that your child could be murdered on the way to X or while playing outside, nothing seems worth it. And what's different now is that we are always weighing independence versus death. And you know what? Death is always going to win. And so what I'm trying to figure out is, how did we get to this such a pessimistic point where I was talking to, I was at a gym teacher, PE conference, PE teacher conference last week. And I was saying, like, well, do you ever let kids just have some fun and play by themselves without an organized game? And they said, oh, no. I mean, I was talking to one guy. No, why not? Well, something bad could happen. They could be bullied. They could be hurt. They could be excluded. And this looking at childhood only through the lens of what could go wrong or what could go terribly wrong is new. And so the question of how do you decide what odds are good enough is also part of that. And I don't blame you for asking, because that's what everybody's wondering now. But I would love to figure out a way to roll back to an era when really safe, pretty darn safe was good enough. And unless something was explicitly odd or dangerous, a neighborhood that had a lot of drive-by shootings, or a car that had no brakes, or a walk to school that involved crossing the alligator pit on a rickety bridge. I mean, those things, okay, you think twice, but to have to think twice about everything kids are doing is new. And I don't have a way of exactly calibrating when something is safe enough. I'm trying to get us to the point where we're not always calibrating, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Andrew, do you have a question?
I mean, like there's these parents around. I mean, do you feel like every decision has to be, seen through the lens of what could go terribly wrong? I mean, I'm curious.
Well, I mean, the one part of that too that I was wondering about is, how much difference does it make
I do.
if the kid knows you're being like safety conscious, because there's things where like it's like you lock the doors in the car and they might not even be aware of that, and so it has its own effect. But like if it's something where you're reminding them to be safe all the time, that feels like that over time could have a really big impact on how they see the world, right? But like, do you have a perspective on that difference?
Yeah, I think I was just actually my blog today. I don't know if this is going to be live or not, but I guess we're live now, but I don't know if anybody's watching it now. But on the Let Grow blog today, I quote a psychiatrist. And I also feel bad that I have to quote psychiatrists when I'm talking about childhood. Somehow through 300,000 years of human evolution, we didn't have psychiatrists that we had to quote whenever we made a decision about parenting. But there's something like 92% of parents, and this is probably in America, feel it gives kids a leg up to tell them that, look, it's a bad world out there. It's not funny. It's serious. It's dangerous. People are mean. And I just want you to know this so nobody takes advantage of you. Nobody can hurt you. And, you're going to go out there with the extra layer of protection of me warning you about the world. Well, it turns out that actually doesn't help kids. I mean, actually, if I could call up my blog for a second, I could read it to you. It turns out that kids who grow up with, it's a world outlook. There's some special word for the world outlook, but kids who grow up with this sort of pessimistic idea that the world out there is mean, actually do worse all across the board, like less happy in relationships. They do less well at work. They make less money. They have more illness, mental and physical. So it's really strange that this thing that we think is prophylactic and helpful and great for our kids, like don't get taken advantage of, turns out to be worse for kids than saying, most people are nice. Most people are good. Mr. Rogers always told kids, even if there's something bad happening, there's a fire, there's a bomb, whatever, look for the helpers. There will always be helpers. And, Mr. Rogers was pretty good when it came to kids' equanimity and figuring out what would reassure them and make them feel brave enough and secure enough to go forth. So I'd say telling kids that the world is really dangerous and that they better watch every single step they take is counterproductive.
Yeah, it certainly feels wrong whenever you do it. So, like if you hear yourself saying it too many times, it doesn't seem healthy.
Yeah, the other thing is, so I work with a psychologist named Camilo Ortiz, who's at Long Island University. And he deals with kids who are, he has a practice as a psychologist, and he deals with kids who are very anxious and also kids who have like obstinate something disorder, kids who are tough. And he does this thing where he asks the parent to come in with the child, and he has them go into a room where there's lots of, toys and distractions. And then he goes into the next room and stands behind a two-way mirror. So he can watch the interaction, but they don't see him. They probably suspect he's there, but they don't see him there. And for the next half hour, he has a little clicker in his hand, and he clicks it every time he hears the parent telling the kid something like, watch out, don't do that, try it this way, that's not a good way to make the blocks, why don't you use this red one? And he says that at the end of half an hour, that's 30 minutes, he has often clicked his clicker 100 times. So I can get to my big point right now, which is that I don't even blame those parents. When I'm with my kids, I am a torrent of great parenting advice, great older person advice, don't look up from your phone, don't cross the street now. Are you kidding? I was screaming at my friend yesterday, and he's 65 when he was crossing the street. I thought he was crossing the street with a bus coming. He was an idiot. He was crazy. He's lucky he's alive. But the point is that when we're with people, it's inevitable that we will correct and intervene and advise and suggest and just provide a lot of running commentary and advice, because it's impossible not to when you're with another person, especially when it's a kid and you want them to do well and be safe and be happy and be nice and share and use their outdoor voice or their indoor voice. So the real problem when you get down to it is not that we're helicopter parenting or that we give too much advice or that we're so horrible or so micromanaging. It's that we're always with our kids. And so everything I'm doing boils down to the idea that, kids need some time without us and without an adult around, because inevitably an adult will try to optimize their experience and say, oh, you guys are taking forever, try it this way here, and or here's how you make a sandcastle. And so we will always intervene. And the only way to stop us from intervening is not to ask us to have superhuman self-control, but to get us out of the picture some of the time. So kids have to figure things out on their own. So I could leave you now and you guys could just talk about this amongst yourselves. What is different about when an adult is with a kid versus when kids are on their own, in some safe place, not some crazy place, some safe enough place. And how the sort of culture that has grown up around never let your kid have any free time, unsupervised, unstructured, is the real culprit, not us parents, not our wiring. And I'll stop in a second, except to say that yesterday somebody was commenting on either Twitter or Facebook, I can't remember, that he went to the hardware store like last week or 2 days ago, whenever that was, with his son who's 9. Kid didn't want to come in. Okay. Kid sits on the bench outside the hardware store, 9 years old. Dad's inside. And when he came out, there were cops. Cops who had been called by somebody who saw a 9-year-old unsupervised for anywhere between 5 and 15 minutes, depending on how hard it was to find the hammer, and had called the cops because the unusualness of seeing an unsupervised kid has become so pervasive that a kid on a bench, not on fire, not weeping, not naked, not being abducted, nonetheless, is reason enough to call 911 and get the cops to come. I'm done with my rant. I'm ready for another question.
I just want to say that we've had the cops called on us too. So.
Oh, well, can you tell me the story?
Yeah, it was. My wife was at home, and like our two of our youngest kids were down like playing near the street of our little, we were kind of in a suburban neighborhood, and like we've been very good like trying to like teach them why to be careful around roads and about cars and how fast they go, and so they've been responsible from a very young age about not running into the street and stuff. So they were playing along the gutter, and they were probably about like 4 and 5 or so. Mm-hmm. And one of our neighbors, called the cops, and the cops showed up, and I mean, it was totally fine, and like they didn't give us a hard time, but it was just yeah, I mean, yeah, it was. And the other story too is we basically unschool our kids, so it's like we try to err on the side of freedom. But one time I was walking with my son, and he was like 7, and he was running like pretty far ahead, and he kind of ran into the street instead of staying on the sidewalk, and there was a car coming along.
Oh, that's terrible.
And like I yelled at him like, come back, and the car stopped, and the guy rolled down his window, and he looked over and he said, "You are the worst father I have ever seen." So I might not be the worst father in the world, but at least to one guy I am. So.
Yeah, I could work on that. Yeah, I mean, as sometimes I think like that guy must have been so scared that he could have killed your kid that of course he takes it all out on you. This idea that there are perfect parents and everybody else is imperfect. When you said your kid ran into the street, I flashed on the time my kid ran into the street. It's horrifying. It's so terrible. But, there's no remote control child who can be perfectly programmed to be absolutely, perfectly behaved like a middle-aged dad at any given time. And so this hatred towards people whose kids either aren't perfect or get into a little trouble shows this remarkable fear, I think. I mean, we're so afraid that something bad is going to happen to us or our kids that we sort of blame parents when anything bad happens to them. And I remember like when I was growing up, I think it's changed now, but if a woman got raped, there was always blaming of the victim. Maybe this doesn't happen anymore. I hope it doesn't. But it was like, yeah, I see Gideon nodding. It's like, oh, she was wearing a short skirt, or oh my God, she was out so late, or she got drunk, or whatever it is. It was a way that, you could make sure that you felt safe because you said, like, she did something so terrible, I would never do that. So she sort of deserved it and it'll never happen to me. Well, gradually we came to realize that was blaming the victim, and we stopped doing it, or stopped doing it as much. But I think, maybe blame needs someplace to go, like water, and it will seep in someplace new. And now we blame the parents of any kid that something bad happens to. In New Zealand or Australia, there was just the worst example of this, and I can give you others. But a kid was 7 or 8, and she was scootering home. She scooters home with her older siblings. They had veered off like a block before they got to the house. And she ended up getting hit by a garbage truck, I think, or some giant truck, and she died. Horrible, horrible, horrible. But I'd say, adding just complete injustice and indecency to injury, a judge declared that the parents were guilty, because why would anybody ever let a child scooter without an adult supervising them? As if no child should ever scooter again. I mean, that's basically what he's saying. Don't scooter unless you're right next to your parent. And that becomes like, that sort of normalizes the idea that a kid alone is automatically in danger, and that a parent is automatically awful, or the worst, if they take their eyes off their kids. And then pretty soon you get people calling 911 when you see a 9-year-old sitting on a bench. So it's this Gordian knot of blame, fear of blame, an inability to recognize the role of fate, luck and no luck. It's a sort of litigious outlook where we can come up with a reason to always blame somebody else and say they should have known, Your Honor. So all in all, it's a huge burden on parents to always be with their kids. And then, as I was saying earlier, when you're with your kids all the time, you're going to intervene. And that's what's really changing childhood, is just the idea that once we are forced to be Velcroed with them all the time, they don't have the freedom to become fully dumb and then smart and adventurous and scared and happy and worried and arguing and solving problems, because we're always there to mediate. I see some nods.
Well,
Anybody else have a story? I mean, I'd love to hear more.
I think Gibran's on, but I just want to throw it out there that the ironic thing, at least from my perspective, is that micromanaging my kids is like one of my least favorite things to do with parenting.
Oh yeah, nobody.
So it's
like
nobody's happy. Like nobody enjoys it.
No.
Yeah,
No, I mean, that's why there's all these stories about, parents are so depressed and anxious now, and it's sort of a vicious circle. Somebody was saying something. What?
Yeah. Two things I want to hook on to. First, a question for Nat, or first, actually, hi Nat, good to see you again. Like that neighbor that called the cops. Like, is it a thing in like an American thing? And maybe I'm just generalizing. Like here, if we'd see like a kid run around, which we're from one of our neighbors, we'd first probably just take them off the street ourselves if we would think that it was dangerous or something like that. And then next it would be like calling the parents of the kids, but like never the cops. It's like, but maybe different culture than here in the Netherlands, or is it like
in the Netherlands?
or they just
You're in child paradise. You can't even talk. You shouldn't even be on this call.
I
You have like such a great culture. You should just leave. Right? It's so unfair. They're all on bikes. They all learn bike safety. The whole culture expects to see people on bikes.
It's really. I mean, our neighboring country, in Germany, everyone has a helmet on, but here, maybe 1 in 500 people or so.
Really interesting.
So yeah, and I was thinking about it, like it's totally tangent from what I wanted to ask, but I'll get to that later. So we wear seatbelts, right, in the car, etc. But here we usually don't wear a biking helmet, except when you're like going speed cycling. But I think it's also because here in the Netherlands, people actually take more care. Like they know there are bikes on the road every time or everywhere, and we also have like good infrastructure for bikes, so it's maybe a bit different from other places. But I also had another question, or maybe related to some people calling the cops. Maybe we've lost like trusting each other to take care of each other's kids. So now when you see a kid on the street, you're not going to take care of them yourself, or keep an eye on them a little bit, like from the side. Immediately, oh, there must be a parent there, so I'm not going to pay attention at all. Or there's not a parent there, I'm going to call the cops. So it's not the shared
community,
the shared community, or
right,
the
village,
shared responsibility of raising kids, in a sense. And I think that's like, I feel it, at least from when I was a kid. There were people in the town that I lived that were telling me I shouldn't do something or should do something that I didn't know, but it was fine. Everyone did it like that, but now not anymore.
So, yeah, I think that's a huge thing, because it's like the neighborhood we were in, like we did not know the neighbors very well. It was and like, according to the police officer, he said it was someone just walking by, saw them, near the street. But my guess is it was one of the neighbors. But who cares? It's like we really don't have that kind of societal trust. That's very true.
So I have to say, if I'm interested in children and the way they're raised and parenting, but I'm really much more interested in this idea of trust and what happens when we stop trusting each other and when we trust to an authority instead. I mean, why would you trust the cops more than yourself? And then you're starting it into a whole system, and there's the cop system, but there's also, in America, you can also get 911, and you could get investigated for child neglect and child abuse, and that's another whole system. And I feel like there's a lot of ways to really hurt parents by involving them in a system as opposed to just reaching out. And here in New York City, where I live, there's these signs in the subway that drive me crazy, that say, if you see a sick passenger, do not attempt to help them. Call a subway employee, who are never around, or a cop, or a police officer. And that's like teaching us to not be human. That's like, remember, it's 1984, so don't you try to help a fellow human being. You're not equipped. You might get hurt. They might get hurt. You're not an expert. So always start the gears turning, and it's like teaching you to be less empathic and less active in your life and in your community. And that's one of the things I'd like to change too. I mean, I realize it's a sort of far-ranging conversation, but one of the things, so my organization now is called Let Grow, L-E-T, new word, grow. It's like on my little sign here. And in America, we've been working on changing the neglect laws. So at least those laws, which are very open-ended and say you must provide, supervision. Well, what does that mean? Proper supervision. What does that mean? It means something different to all of us. So instead of it being that, we're trying to narrow it and say neglect is when you put your child in obvious, serious, and likely danger, not anytime you take your eyes off your kids. And I'm hoping, there's a lot of fronts to fight this battle on, but one of them is the legal front, that like somebody calls 911 and says your kid is sitting outside, there's a kid sitting outside. Okay, it's not against the law. You might not like it, but it's not against the law. So we're working in another 4 states this year. It's really hard and expensive to get a law passed, but we'll see. Got it passed in 4 states so far. Who's in a state? Somebody, Nat, you're in where?
Alabama.
Okay. And is anybody else in an American state?
Yeah, I'm in California.
That's
I will say, as far as the whole like letting my children be by themselves, I will say that the whole idea of, well, I don't know, I've always had my biggest fear as a parent being that my children will unjustly be taken from me, not by, neighbors or like strangers, but by law enforcement, or not law enforcement particularly, but, by the government. Like I have this fear that, there will be intervention that is unjust. So yeah, that is like a big fear. And
don't read The School for Good Mothers. You'll never go to sleep again. An amazing novel. Have you heard of it?
Mm-mm.
It's a dystopian novel about what happens when you're an imperfect mom and then you're sent to the School for Good Mothers, which is it's sort of sci-fi. It's very, very creepy. It's going to become a mini series. But yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be a big fear. I mean, as the person who gets all the calls and the emails from parents who are dealing with Child Protective Services, it is almost never that the kids get taken away. The worst thing that happens is that you have to take some stupid parenting class, and or that you get put on the child abuse registry, which is bad. But it doesn't, your kids don't get taken away. That's an excess fear that you don't have to worry about.
Yeah, maybe I'll have a slightly pessimistic voice here. In the Netherlands, the past few years, in how do you call it, an affair? Maybe you've heard of it or not, but there was a government, inside the government, there was very like malpractice in a sense, by which mostly mothers, single moms of kids that didn't get to. There was stuff that went wrong with the finances from the government's end, and the mothers couldn't pay the government for certain things, and then their kids were taken from them by the government. It's been a really big affair, and that's came to light in like the last year or last 2 years, and thousands of kids have been taken by the government, put in other people's
in foster care,
foster care, yeah. And there's still many parents who are looking for their kids but can't find their kids. And
oh my
so
God.
it's not like the Netherlands is.
All right, now
like
I'm recalculating my Netherlands assessment.
Yeah.
You can ride bikes, but you'll be snatched off them by the government.
It's very bureaucratic here. So, but I'm sorry, I don't know the exact phrasing, wording, and translation of some words. But it's if this is like a topic you're into. So maybe this is something to look into if it's of interest.
Yeah, it is of interest. Thank God I only concentrate on one country because I have enough problems here. And I also, while I'm reassuring you about like your kids are not going to be taken away if you're a white middle class mom, who just gave her kids some independence. It is a big fear if you are poor, because sometimes poverty is mistaken for neglect. So my favorite editorial about our law, which says that neglect is when you put your kids in serious and obvious and likely danger, is that it is also embraced by the whole social justice world as a way. It's like stopping the stop and frisk of young Black men, stopping the investigation of poor people just because like their kid is coming home every afternoon with a latchkey because mom is single and she's working 2 jobs. That's not neglect, right? So that's it. It's not that nobody has to worry about the over intervention. It's that it's sort of a different set of circumstances than simply letting your kids walk down the street or play outside. Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a question just about like perception. So you go around talking to people about this, and I was wondering, yes, I was wondering if like there's a big disconnect between how people respond to the idea kind of abstractly, like giving your kids more independence versus the actual individual instances where they see a kid up, like is there a huge disconnect there? I can imagine it, but I don't really know.
I'll tell you the huge disconnect, and it's going to be a big ad for what I do. But remember, everything I do is free. So I talk to so many audiences, and I've done it for 15 years, and I've been in different countries and all around America, high and low. And what I've seen for all this time, and what's both heartening and disheartening, is that when I give my talk and I start people remembering about their own childhoods and what they loved doing, and we played in the woods, we made forts, I would always find somebody outside and we'd go and we'd do this. And then I say, and do you let your own kids do that? And they'd go, no. And so then they sort of recognize like, oh, isn't that interesting? What I loved doing as a kid, the thing I enjoyed most, the thing I remember best is something that I don't give my own kid. And then, they would leave sort of like, okay, time for a change, and nothing changed. So that is the disconnect that I've seen. And that's why I started Let Grow. So the disconnect is between wanting to give your kids more freedom, thinking it sounds great, remembering your own childhood, and then actually doing it. And the reason I think that most people don't end up doing it is twofold. One is what we were talking about before, the inability to live with the idea that this is going to be 99% safe, but it's not 100% safe. So that is already scary. I mean, I talked to one guy whose who let his 12-year-old walk 2 houses down in suburban Kentucky to her friend's house, and the mother walked her back just in case. So, after the play date, quote unquote play date. So there's this inability to just even accept the fact that like 30 seconds outside is probably not too bad, but it's not completely perfect. But the other thing is, it's really hard to be the only parent who is doing this, because you send your kid out to play in the park. If there's no other kids to play with, no, it's so boring. They will be back in 3 minutes because they swung on the swings. It was boring at the end. And also because if your whole community isn't doing it, it is still a little odd to see the kid on the bench, the kid walking to school. And so I started Free Range Kids, and I wrote the Free Range Kids book after I let my son ride the subway. And I started the blog Free Range Kids, and then it sort of became this movement. And then 5 years ago, some geniuses came to me and said, let's start a nonprofit together, because we're worried that kids are growing up kind of fragile, easily hurt, sort of sensitive, unnecessarily sensitive, and especially mistaking feeling uncomfortable for being literally unsafe. They hadn't really gotten the calculation that there's a difference between, okay, this is not fun, or this is hard for me, versus I shouldn't have to do this, or this is too scary or dangerous. And I said, okay, we can, I'm happy to start a nonprofit. I would love to have regular pay. That sounds fantastic. And the amplification of an actual organization working towards this. But we can't just be thought leaders. We can't just be sounding the alarm that this is no good. This over interventionist society. We have to change behavior, not just minds. And so the way Let Grow works is that we try to get whole groups of parents to agree to let their kids do things outside together, or let their kids just play after school instead of being in an organized activity. And the way we generally do it is through schools, getting a school to start assigning the Let Grow project, which is so simple, and yet it's one of our main activities. Is the Let Grow project is when teachers give kids the homework assignment that says, go home and do something new on your own without your parents. Walk the dog, make dinner, go to the store, go to a friend's house, get yourself to school, wait at the bus stop. And because it's an assignment, so it's endorsed by a teacher in a school, so that sort of absolves you of the difficulty of saying yes to something. And because everyone else is doing it, then it becomes normal. I mean, our whole idea is to make this kind of independence normal again. And so parents who might think, yes, I want my kid to walk to school like I did, or I wish they had sandlot baseball the way I grew up, but can't get it going on their own, can when there's a bunch of people starting it at the same time. And my favorite story about this is that there was a boy who, for his Let Grow project in some wealthy town in Connecticut, went to the super expensive store in town and bought himself, a gold-plated muffin or whatever they get there. And the staff was like, what's he doing here? Where are his parents? And one of the staff asked him, it's like, hey, how come you're here by yourself? Where's your mom or your dad? And he said, oh, I'm doing my Let Grow project. And they're like, okay, what's that? He said, I have to do something by myself. It's my assignment from school. I'm like, oh, okay. And then as other kids started coming in, then it was normal again for kids to come into the store and just buy stuff. And you need to have more than one person doing it in your town for it to take root. So anybody who's here today, I would beg you. I mean, the reason I'm here today is to try to get people to actually, make some change where they live. I would beg you to try to get your school or your church or your synagogue or someplace interested in assigning this project. And then we'll talk about Play Club later. But if you get a bunch of people doing it at once, nobody goes backwards. I mean, it's better. Your town becomes a better place to live. Your kids become happier. Your time becomes freer, and the anxiety lifts. So, and it's free. So that's my recommendation.
Yeah, we put our son in an alternative school, and one of the things they just do, we didn't have to do anything. Is it's not even a project. It's just that they have a regular ritual of the kids going out. It's in downtown Toronto. They go out and find themselves food at a restaurant, and they eat it, and they go all by themselves, And like it's a mixed age kind of thing, so it's easier too. So you can have like, some older kids with them. But like that seems great. But even there, like where kids who have been put into school on purpose in an alternative school by the parents, there are nervous parents still with that. It's still a struggle.
Well, it's,
right?
the thing is, of
Yeah.
course, everybody's nervous. I'm nervous.
Yeah.
I think we've established that. The thing that lowers it is, it's what behavioral therapy is all about, is exposure, right? So once they've gone out to lunch for a week, the next week is not like, oh, I'm going out to lunch again. It's like, okay, wow, why do you keep eating at that burger place? It sucks.
Yeah, they do choose terrible food for sure.
Right, which is also okay. So,
this is a really, go ahead.
No, I'll wait.
So anxiety, like, it's a really interesting topic to me, because I read in your book that if we let kids do these things like going to the store or walking to the school or cooking dinner on their own, like, they wouldn't be as anxious as they are right now. And thinking about my own childhood and like my whole generation, we did all these things. And like, I'm like 34 right now. And I have so many friends who are like my age or a bit younger, and they're still like so anxious and still feel so unprepared for the adult world and work and having their own kids. So I'm wondering, like, what else could be the missing ingredient
Oh, how
here
interesting.
besides like just—
That's so interesting. So they all had their own free time after school. They'd go out and play, and maybe they'd come home and make dinner, or they'd make breakfast with the family or something like that. They were free range kids. Yeah.
Well, maybe not like very free range, but like pretty free range for like today's standards. Like when I was a kid, like nobody was taken home from school by their parents. Like this just wasn't a thing. And most of the kids just played outside for hours. And yeah, like
that's
still
so
like
interesting.
there are so many of them who are still anxious as adults. And I'm wondering, like, what else could be there besides like trying things on their own?
So I'm just gonna ask you another question. Were they anxious when they were kids with you? Oh,
Yeah,
okay. They were. I have no idea where my phone is. I would go turn it off. Sorry, just so were they anxious as children?
Yeah, some of them were. Like I can't even say if I was anxious as a kid. Like it's hard to tell. Like in some ways, yes. In some ways, I was pretty brave. But
do you think they are more anxious now? Are they parents? Are they?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I feel like people, like, even if they're older, they're usually more anxious now than they were like 20 years ago.
I know it's a bit of a boring reason, but I just think everything's so much more anxious now with the internet showing us all this bad news all the time.
Yeah, for sure. It's have you heard of mean world syndrome? It was coined, I think, in the 80s, but it's the idea that like you see, something bad on the news, whether it's online or on television, and that makes you think, oh, what a horrible world out there. And so then you don't want to go outside, you stay inside and you watch more TV or more internet, and like, oh my God, another thing, and this woman was almost raped and this person was almost snatched, and then
I was going to say, Maria, the problem is that they're not free range anymore. That's what happened. They're just I mean, that's the thing, like so many adults, like we get stuck in these. I mean, yeah, it's exactly what you're saying, Lenore. It's just like we like adults are susceptible to the same programming that kids are getting now. I mean, it's like we get scared and we stop doing things and we stop going out, and like
also,
in many ways, kids are braver than adults sometimes.
Right, they haven't had it like squeezed out of them. Oh God, there was something I was going to say. The other thing is what we were talking about before is that everything is framed as a possible danger. I mean, I cannot tell you. I went to Israel, like, on how many coffee studies have been done. It's like, give up. People have been drinking coffee for hundreds of years, and lifespans are getting longer. Coffee is not a big deal. Right. But like people are still, there must be something wrong. People enjoy it, so it just feels like, don't drink milk, don't tan, don't be in the sun, but do be in the sun, because then you won't get rickets. And it's when you live, one of the ideas that I was talking to a religion professor once, and he said that, it's not that religion is gone from modern life, but it occupies a smaller circumference of our existence. And it used to tell us everything, what to eat and say and where and do. And now it's sort of like how we celebrate the holidays and how we pray, right? And so what filled all that other space telling us what to do and how to be good and right? And to a certain extent, it's been filled with expert advice, and that advice changes by the minute. So if you have a study from yesterday that says, don't sleep on on a mattress, and then today it says you better sleep on a very soft mattress or you're going to have problems. You are bombarded with information. Do eat eggs, don't eat eggs, do eat butter, don't eat butter, meat good, meat bad, and you can't go by a sort of idea that like somebody else is in charge and it's going to be okay, and you don't have a pretty easy or an obvious set of rules, and so you are constantly on edge because you don't know if you're doing it right and if you're going to be blamed. And the other thing that the religion professor, his name is Alan Levinovitz, said is that two things. One is, when you think that there's something greater in charge, whether it is a benevolent God or fate, just the fact that things happen, you don't feel like it's just you in charge of everything. And if anything goes wrong, it's because you were too lazy or stupid or bad. And there's some sympathy if something does go wrong, because that's the way, God has a big plan. We can't possibly comprehend it, or fate is fickle and fortune goes in a circle. And so there's less sympathy if something goes wrong, because we're back to blaming the victim, because, bad things only happen to bad people in this thing. And also, the other thing about religion is that it generally says perfection is not going to be here on earth. Perfection is in another world, the world to come, heaven, your next incarnation, but not now. So the fact that things aren't perfect is the way things must be. But we really feel like we can make things perfect. We can make our kids' childhoods perfect, make them smart, brave, happy, well-adjusted, and get into Harvard if we only do everything right. And that's a huge burden, and that will make anyone anxious, because no kid is going to go through life without a lot of, trust me, my kids are older, your kids are younger. There will be so much, heartache and confusion along the way. And it's not because you're bad. It's because that's life. Actually, if you look at my Twitter feed today, there's a quote from D.H. Lawrence saying, happiness is sort of like just a vacation holiday. You can't expect it all the time. The idea is to engage with life, and that has a lot of, pain and joy. So we're anxious because things aren't perfect, and we're told that they can be, in long and short. At least I think.
Yeah, I have a funny anecdote to share.
Good.
Another one about the Netherlands, because I'm from the Netherlands. I just moved to Sweden 1.5 years ago.
Okay.
But we have kind of like a show before, or like news before Sinterklaas, which is like the Dutch Santa Claus, arrives. And it was a huge scene last week, because in that show, so it's like a completely made up kid show, but it's really, really good. The boat that Santa Claus is on sank like the night, or like the day before he would arrive.
Wait, for real or in the story?
No, it's all fake. So it's
okay,
all fake.
okay.
So just there was a production team that came up with that storyline. And I think it was on the news that parents were so upset because their kids were just crying the whole night. And yeah, there was also that started this discussion, like, is this something new of this age, or is it just a bad script and you shouldn't do that to little
That's
4-year-old
really interesting.
kids that see their presents like go down in the ocean, and all their heroes, the Sinterklaas, like might drown and die? Or is it just something that they
grim.
yeah, it's pretty grim. Or is it just something that it's like they should, well, not that they would die, of course, but they know it's going to be all right, I guess.
Right.
It always is. Or is it something they should deal with, or is it bad?
So what did people say? And also, I found my phone, so let me just turn it off while I'm talking to you guys so I don't hear it anymore. Come on, let's put it on airplane mode. There we go. So what was the prevailing opinion?
I'm not sure. I think I just heard different opinions, like people just being upset because they had their 4-year-old kid not being able to sleep that night, and like next.
Right. you're suddenly silent. We can't hear you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, now we can. Okay, yeah. Now we can't. This is sadder than Santa Claus dying. I hate it when I can't hear us. So let's just talk for a second about fairy tales, right? I mean, fairy tales have everything bad. I mean, grandma gets eaten by the wolf, and in some instances, I think so does Goldilocks, not Goldilocks, Red Riding Hood, and Goldilocks gets chased from the bears, and Hansel and Gretel are abandoned in the woods by their stepmother because they don't have enough food at home. That's the actual original tale. I can't feed all of us.
Kids. Yeah, it's always kids with no adults around, right? That's always the start of the
right. And a lot of bad stuff happens, and somehow, Grimm's fairy tales were pretty grim, and we expected kids to listen to them, and maybe it was a way of sort of inoculating them to a little bit of fear and disappointment. Not to say that if I was doing the biggest video of the year, Santa Claus is coming to town, Santa Claus is coming to drown, that's like a bad one, right? Right. I think unless they really wanted to start a national conversation, at which point, good for them. I don't even know if I would recommend it. It sounds kind of ridiculous, unless he sputters and realizes, this was great. Now I've washed all your toys clean. Do they bring him back at the end? I mean, what happened?
Yeah, I think
never heard from again.
I actually haven't seen it, which I regret, but I think in the end he came by plane, which was a whole other controversy, of course. But at least he arrived. I don't really know what how they saved him, but yeah, I think the main thought was indeed on the one hand, your kid is super sad and can't sleep, and on the other, it's but they should be able to handle some setbacks in life, and
right.
Of course, you can tell your kids that it's probably going to be fine and that no one's going to die,
right?
But that it's going to be exciting, because it's always like that. It's always right before he arrives, there's a big problem.
Oh, there's a crisis. Yeah.
Of course, if your kid is 4 and when they were 3, they did not get it yet. So it might be the first time for a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So what's interesting to me about your story is I don't think there's any other era in history when that would have been a big discussion. Maybe I would mutter to my husband, wow, that was a terrible one. That was screwed up. But everything about kids, once again, is seen through this lens of what could go wrong, what could go horribly wrong, what could go so wrong that it'll never get better. And if your kid has a sleepless night, okay, they have a lot of nights ahead of them. They have a lot of nights behind them. One sleepless night doesn't seem like the end of the world. And, maybe one spunky columnist would say that was the worst script ever. Or thank God for that script. It taught my kid that, never, not everything's perfect and that's still okay. But to ignite a national conversation about one television special is weird too. I mean, it just makes us think that our kids are so fragile that a night of bad television viewing, is the end. There goes any hope for their psychological futures. That's pretty fragile.
But I mean, it's the whole concept of trauma, right?
Yes.
It's the idea that one little incident at any time could basically ruin their entire life. From that point forward, they're screwed. I mean, I was watching this thing. I mean, apparently I had no idea, but it's we've had a few now that we bought a house, we've had a few sleepovers. Our oldest daughter.
Oh my God.
And apparently, I had no idea. Sleepovers are apparently controversial now.
And that's what my thing yesterday. I wrote this on Facebook, and somebody had written to me, said, I want to have a sleepover, but all the other parents are so worried. Is there any way I could talk them down? So I asked. It's okay, anybody having ideas for how to renormalize the idea of a sleepover and not think of everything as a trauma in the making? And I got shot down. What's wrong with sleepovers? Oh, kids could see porn, kids could be bullied, kids could stay up late and you'll never have them back on a schedule again. Kids could be molested by each other, kids be molested by the father, could be molested by the brother, could be molested by the uncle, could be molested by the cat. And I don't want to sound flip because I don't want anybody molested at a sleepover. But I think if you sort of, the best advice I have in terms of actual advice is that you teach your kids the 3 R's, which are to recognize that no one can touch you where your bathing suit covers. Resist. If anyone wants to bother you, you pound them, you scream, you run away. It's up to you. You're allowed to resist. And then report. If anything does happen and you feel weird about it, and even if a grown-up said never tell your mommy, or if you tell your mommy I'm going to hurt you, nothing bad will happen to you if you tell me. Just tell me. I promise I won't be mad at you, and nothing bad will happen. So you try to keep the lines of communication open, and that's going to save your kid a lot more than never letting them talk to a stranger or go on a sleepover, or so it seems to me. But then a lot of people wrote and said, I was molested on a sleepover, or I'm worried about my kid. I mean, like, I can understand if they were, I would be, I'm sure I would think twice about it too. But I feel like this is another case of seeing everything through the lens of danger, instead of seeing a night of bonding and staying up too late and eating junk food and telling stories. It's seen as a night of, satanic horrors. And I don't know how to stop our consciousness from being rerouted in that direction. But that's the direction that stops us from letting our kids do anything and makes us anxious and sad all the time. If you're thinking about your kid always, like any fun could be an invitation to molestation and rape. That's a pretty anxious way to live. That's like living in a war zone, even though you're not. So what happened with your sleepovers?
It's been amazing. I mean, we've had a couple here, and then we just had my daughter went to a friend's birthday party, and they had a sleepover. So, but I mean, I like the 3 R thing. I mean, that's something I could talk to them about, because it's like, I mean, it's that's the thing, like hearing the stories. Like I was hearing these stories of people, like real stories, and I was like, oh crap, is this like, do I need to be worried about this? Like once again, what are the odds? What trying to run in my mind, like what
somebody asked me, she asked, what are the odds? And I'm like, I don't know what the odds are.
Right, but it's just that
how would you even know?
It's like I was trying to figure out, like, okay, how much of a risk is this? And I can see in myself the part of me that's just like, well, just to be safe, let's not do it, just to be safe. But it's like the one thing we've seen with our kids, like as they're starting to like we're homeschooled, so like it's always hard trying to find like activities and things. But every single thing, even with homeschoolers, there's always an adult, there's always a curriculum, there's always a and we are actively finding ways to give our kids time to like of unstructured playtime. I mean that's really what they want.
Right.
They want to play with their friends, like they they want to be with their friends.
Right. I'm actually writing the 3 R's into this chat here. Report.
Oh, thank you.
Report. Report if something bad happens, right?
And I think the resisting too is kind of tricky, because I mean, so much of our culture now is saying that that's bad, or that you shouldn't even like any kind of violence or any kind of like it's just like I don't know. It's like that's frowned on too. So it's just
right.
It's just more. I mean, one of the classes our kids are going to is a karate class. So I think stuff like that. It's just like I think does build that confidence in the.
Yeah.
I hope they never have to use it, but it's just like I think it really does help.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's also all over my website. But yeah. Were there people who have now decided that sleepovers are good since they've, since you opened your house to one, or since you've endorsed them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we've only lived in this, house for like about 9 months now, so it's we're still kind of getting
right. Okay.
But yeah, but I mean,
that's curious.
It's
just.
I think it is, and I mean one thing we've even thought about doing is like basically having an open house, like different hours of the day where parents can just drop off their kids, and like we have a big house, we have a big yard, and like we just have it like as a normal thing where they can just drop kids, our kids can play together. But we were realizing in order to even sell that to the parents, we probably have to come up with some sort of like educational like excuse or something, or like I mean.
Okay, so So if you go to LetGrow, and I'm gonna go there now to look for what it is, but if you go to letgrow.org, oops, wait, let's turn this off, letgrow.org, and you look under, why is this taking forever? Research. There's this reading list, and these are helpful articles, and that maybe pick out 2 or something and you send them to people that, like, you know, this is good for kids. Our future depends on them, you know, community building can create strong kids. Why are teens suffering from anxiety? Taking risks helps kids learn to cope. I mean, just, you know, once again, I'm sorry that child rearing requires a PhD and, you know, several references and footnotes for any decision you make. But, you know, you got to be in it to win it. So just send them a couple of things. I've been thinking about the importance of free play and how it builds brains and how children who don't get any of it are stunted. And in the 80s, like, should have average creativity would be, you know, this is true. Kids who were like, took these tests of creativity were, who were like in the middle of the pack in the 80s are at the top of the pack now, because kids are losing their creativity because everything is so prescribed, right? Everything is so supervised and assisted and intervened and adult run that they're like waiting to be told what to do. So use some of these intellectual arguments to get buy-in. I would suggest.
What do people think of like technological hacks and shortcuts, like giving your kid an Apple Watch so that they can just call you whenever, like you let them go and they can call you if they have a problem, and they don't, right? But you know they could. I mean, I remember it because when our son was a baby, we used one of the camera baby monitors, not because we were actually worried, but just to stop ourselves from going in and checking on him and bothering
interesting.
him. Right. It was like just to stop ourselves, right? If we could look there, he wouldn't be bothered. And then after a while you stop looking, right? And the watch is kind of like that too. But I think some people also react negatively to using that approach. So what do people think?
I wonder what people think too, because I have so many different opinions on it. I haven't settled on one. So Obed, were you talking?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, actually, because we started doing that with our daughter. She's 7, so she's already kind of big, but we never left her alone or anything. She's kind of always going around with us. And we joined like salsa course on Wednesdays in the evening. Drive, so it was like 1.5 hours to go, do the course, and then come back. But then like we don't have anywhere to kind of drop our daughter. So like, yeah, we were kind of anxious about it. Okay, we're gonna leave at home, but then she's gonna be alone for like 1.5 hours. So then some evenings she just calls her grandma on like Skype, and they just talk. And sometimes we just left her alone, and my wife leaves her phone in the house, and we just kind of explain to her how to call, so she can unlock it, and she can call me if she needs anything. So it's like, you know, if you need something, just call me. Or I told her, like, something happens, the house is burning down, just kind of run out of the house. Don't worry about it. Yeah, like I think it's mostly the anxiety of adulthood rather than the actual danger, because like nothing's gonna happen to her in the house. I don't know what the odds are, but like, I don't know, a meteorite needs to fall on the house for something to happen.
A meteorite did just fall on a house in California in the middle of nowhere. So interesting. Yeah. But yeah.
So like, I think it's mostly the anxiety, and to find ways to more than protect them is your own anxiety. Like leaving the phone isn't gonna do anything for her. It's mostly for ourselves.
Yeah. I'd like to hear anybody else think of, their thoughts on phones and reachability and tracking. Christy?
I've thought a lot about that. We're kind of in a different situation because we are more in the country. So my parent fears are more about, wild animals and, oh my goodness, we might have mountain lions in the area and whatever. We have a dog now, so that helps a lot, because I just say, keep the dog with you, you'll be fine. But I have thought about, this is so nerdy, but when I was young, I don't know, I had my ham radio license, and I was thinking,
cool.
My son's getting to the age where he's so into that stuff, he'd probably be into that. And then if he ever wanted to reach me, he could, and I could reach him. And it's not like the phone thing where there's all this other stuff involved.
It's a great idea. Ham radio is a great idea.
Yeah. So, and it's also, I mean, as far as being exposed to stuff, like there are laws, there are rules about what you can talk about when you're on there. It's an FCC regulated thing. So, so I feel really good about like, well, that's totally legitimate. thing that we can do.
That's a neat thing. I mean, how hard are ham radios? I have no idea. How
They
hard
are
to
so
learn?
easy to get. You have to pass one, maybe 2 written exams. The qualifications have gotten easier over the year, but basically you have to take a written exam. If your kid can read and memorize answers, then he can do that, or she, speaking in the context of my son. But, you know, he's already so into that. I think I got mine when I was, I don't know, I was probably 11, but I don't think there's even an age limit on it.
And is it an expensive thing to buy? I don't even know what it looks like.
The radios themselves are, gosh, I mean, it's been so many years since I've looked into it, but I think a little handheld radio is probably a couple $100. So they're, you know, compared to a phone, no. So
yeah, right. Oh, it's so interesting. All right, let's see. Anybody else thinking about phones and accessibility?
I just think about, I just think about tracking, and not because I would track my own kid. She's like 2 months old, so she's doesn't care for. But like people defending it, saying like they track their kids, and they're like, yeah, my kids like think it's easier as well because I don't check up on them all the time that way. Like, oh, when will you be home? Where are you? Blah 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 blah. But to me, it feels very wrong. Because maybe there is some type of convenience, but I think it doesn't weigh up to, the kind of freedom that your kid gives up. Definitely, you know, when you start doing it, maybe when they're very young, but at some age, they're gonna need their own time. And as a parent, you probably don't know when that will be. It's probably going to be sooner than you expect. And then it's a very, I think it's very limiting of their freedom, and a bad thing. So I think the convenience doesn't weigh up to the loss of freedom, to say.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think even as an adult, if you like, imagine, I don't know, let's say in the USA, the FBI actually has something tracking every single phone. Like, you know, there's not going to be anyone actually checking where you are, right? Because like no one's going to do that, assuming that will happen, right? But like just the knowledge that someone could track you will kind of give you anxiety or change your behavior. Like I remember as a kid, a couple of times just going off with my friends for like an hour walk in the city, like something like that, like something that my mom wouldn't approve or wouldn't let me do. But we were like 5 or 6 of us, right? Like, and we were like, I don't know, 12. We were not like 5 years old. We were small teenagers, right? So 5, 6 boys, nothing's gonna happen to a bunch of boys. And my mom would like freak out if she knew about it. And I was kind of a shy boy, and like doing those things, and I still remember it, right? Like 20 years later, I still remember. So there were definitely impactful moments where I felt kind of a sense of adventure, and I'm doing something that is not wrong, but that you know that, oh, my mom doesn't want to know. That type of like I don't know, secrecy is kind of healthy for young kids. Like it's something that nothing's gonna happen to you. You're doing like an adventure with your friends, and like the moment, if I had a phone, and I knew my mom could just check where I am, and she knows that, oh shit, he's like 10 kilometers away, she's gonna, you know, freak out. Like that just sounds unhealthy. I don't know how to explain it, but it just sounds like as an unhealthy thing to do with your kids.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I am.
All right. I'm just putting my email in here, and I'm hoping that because shock colors, what a good idea. Why didn't I think of that? There's my revenue stream. I'm hoping afterwards, Maria, that at least will you have the email addresses of everyone? I could just email back to people and they could tell me these stories, because these are really good. So Obed, what you're talking about is so poignant to me, because you're talking about something that is so good and normal and a little devious and sneaky, and if not then, and if not in that simple way, then when and how? I think he's been actually abducted at the moment. He's gone. A childhood without an ability to do any of that seems very hampered or stunted. You know, I mean, it's great that you did that, and there's a reason you remember it 20 years later, because it was a feeling of, I'm not a little boy anymore, and I'm not irresponsible, but I know who I am, right? And I interviewed all these 16-year-olds who were being tracked by their parents. Not all, I interviewed half a dozen. And they were resigned to it. They didn't have a way to avoid it. Their parents had declared that, that was that. But they expressed real frustration, in part that they also couldn't prove to their parents that they were responsible young people. Because how do you prove it if they have a way of checking, right? It's like, well, of course you didn't go to that party. You knew I could tell if you were there, right? So there's no way of almost becoming like internalizing maturity, because it's always being checked. And the sort of literal analogy is something called that you don't give them a chance to grow up and be responsible yet. So the panopticon was, I think, invented in the 1600s or something. It was a nice idea for prison. So instead of keeping everybody locked in their cells, some guy came up with the idea of make a circular prison, and there's a tower in the middle, and somebody from the tower can be looking out at all times, and you never know what direction they're looking. So then everybody could leave their cells, because you never knew, like you couldn't start a fight, because what if at that very minute the panopticon guard was looking at you, you would be thrown, to the dogs or whatever. So it was a way of keeping people well behaved, because there was always the possibility that they were being watched. And that's the thing. Even the parents who say, oh, I won't watch you a lot, I'll only use it every once in a while if I can't get hold of you or whatever. Any given moment you could be watched. And so it's like, well, we do that to prisoners, and I don't think of kids as prisoners. But there's a lot of people who don't think that there's a downside to treating them that way, because like the prisoners, they will be well behaved. And I love the fact that Obed, if that's how you pronounce his name, was not well behaved, but he was smart and brave and excited and took agency and was with his friends and had an adventure. And life without that seems very depressing.
Yeah, one thing I think I pretty much agree with everyone, but I want to push back just a little bit, because I think we're agreeing maybe too much, which is that I think it's like, what's the alternative, right? Like, I can imagine a world where it made sense, like if otherwise the parents wouldn't let them out of their sight, probably better to give them, to have that be like a gateway to like them then giving more freedom eventually. Like, oh, I'm finally getting okay with this, I don't need to do this anymore. But like for a nervous parent, I could totally imagine it being a way to start giving freedom without having to go all at once. But I mean, I totally agree. I mean, you don't want nobody wants to be surveilled, and by your own parents. That sounds pretty grim, right?
So the idea of it's sort of a step. I mean, that's what I have heard. I hear that from parents all the time, including someone on our board, who is grateful for the phone, because that allowed him to let his daughter and his son also leave the home sooner. And it is an easy way. It's like, okay, if you're going to be out really late, if I have a way of getting hold of you, then I trust you more. Not I trust you more. I trust the circumstances more. I guess the other thing is the underlying premise of tracking them. And the guy who started Life 360, which is a super duper tracking device, called me, and we talked for a while, and he said he's a free range parent. He just loves Life 360 also. Anyway, it rewrites independence as dangerous is the other thing. It's like, it just means that anytime you're out, either you're safe because you're connected to somebody, or you're unsafe. And so just being outside is automatically unsafe. And that's, who am I? I'm me in my apartment trying to make people realize that there's something, insidious about the idea. I mean, me too. In the mornings, I walk to the park to do my exercise. Will I take my phone with me or not? And sometimes I think, yeah, just in case something happens. And it's like, nobody could have thought that way before, because there wasn't in case something happens. In case something happens, you better hope that there's some nice stranger passing by, who helps you. But now it's just an underlying, it's become an equation now, whereas before there wasn't anything that you could weigh it against. So I'm not going to create a world without phones. But I would say, at least to parents who are tracking their kids, that at some point you have to stop, because there are parents who are still tracking their kids at college and beyond. And even in high school, it seems cruel.
Interesting.
Yeah, we just got our daughter a cell phone, and it wasn't to track her. It was so she can contact us if she wants to, you know.
That's the thing. It does everything. Yeah.
Yeah. But now that I think about my own childhood, you know, there were no cell phones, you know, and I went out on my bike by myself all the time, or in my car when I was a teenager, etc. And it meant I couldn't call for help. You know, so there was some sticky situations I got into, and I was all by myself, and I had to figure it out because I couldn't just call someone for help. And so I see pros and cons to that. Like, she can always call for help to get bailed out or whatever. So
and that's the con.
You know, that's the con. But I mean, the pro is that if it's a really bad situation, you know,
it's the pro and the con is the thing. It's both at the same time.
Yeah.
So here I must tell you the quick story from Wall Street Journal. Did a story 2 years ago, how to raise a free range kid in 2020. They did not call me. And they interviewed a mom who said that as a child, you know, obviously no phones. I mean, this is going to be a conversation nobody has in a generation because nobody will remember a childhood without phones. But she would love to go down to the creek. She was like 8, 9, 10. And it was very important for her to have that time with nature, with her thoughts, just being outside, you know, interested. And she was so glad that now she could give that same childhood to her child because, you know, she gave the kid a phone. And wouldn't you believe it? She was going down to the creek or whatever, riding her bike around, and the chain fell off her bike, the girl. And so the mom is saying, and it's so great because then she could just call my husband and he came over there and he fixed the bike right away. And that way she could have the same experience as me. And obviously it's, you know, we get it. And so what does it mean if you don't, I mean, like, you know, I call my husband when things are bad and I want him to come help me or pick me up or whatever, or, you know, I can't get in the house, come down to the key. So it's not like I don't avail myself of that, but I'm grateful that I had times when I was totally off.
Well, the answer
is to be a lazy parent.
No, the answer is simple. You have to give your kids more freedom than you had. You have to send her to a different country with the phone. You have to push. Like, now that she has more ability,
right.
She has to have more freedom, right? I mean, that's
good luck. Yeah. No, that's true. I had a friend, a person I worked with, whose daughter was in a semester abroad in Berlin, and she was showing me this on her phone. She said, and see, now she's in her dorm. I'm like, first of all, it's so boring. Secondly, you don't know whose room she's in her dorm. And thirdly, why are you watching? It's like, what are you going to tell her? Oh, don't go down Bergenstrasse. That's a terrible neighborhood. What do you know about Berlin? Come on, right? But this compulsion to know everything is huge. It's growing. It's insulting. It's invasive. It's weird, and it drives you crazy because her phone dies and she's in the middle of the intersection and you think she's, you know, lying there, but it's actually the battery broke, you know, and now you're stuck like, oh my God, my kid is in the middle of the street.
Yeah. But basically the only way I could see like tracking is if we never ever checked it. Or I mean,
that's the panopticon.
Yeah, right, because they don't know if you're checking it. Yeah. I remember I used to climb trees. I climbed like these like 50, 60 foot trees, and like it was super dangerous. I'd go way up there. And I remember telling my mom about it, and she was a very kind of anxious kind of parent. But I love her response. Like she'd be like, Nat, oh no, like she would freak out about it. And then she would say, just don't tell me about it.
Just don't tell me, right.
And I think that's so healthy.
That is healthy.
Because it made me feel like, oh, I'm doing something dangerous. And like, but she was still saying like, you can do it. Just don't tell me about it.
No, that's actually really meaningful to me. I remember my parents at some point saying that to me, like, you know, I don't need to hear everything in your life.
Right.
And like that's a good thing, a good reminder now that I'm a parent actually to say that. It's good.
So that's an interesting thing in general, because what we're doing with being with our kids so much and knowing so many details, and so much it isn't even our choice. The school sends home, you know, posts the grades online every second, and you're supposed to go to the portal and see how your kids are doing. And then there's school buses that will tell you your kid got on, your kid got off. I mean, there's just so many ways that society is already organized to sort of, I always think of like the the cicadas, you know, they die and then all that's left is the exoskeleton, and we're supposed to like crawl in and live their lives with them. It's like, it's here, honey, I'll take your exoskeleton around with me and we'll go to school and we'll see what your grades are and we'll see if you're climbing a tree. And so it's it makes us very anxious because it puts us in the role of God, you know, this omniscient being who can know everything our kid is doing and eating and reading and watching and getting on and going to. And who wouldn't feel anxious if we're supposed to be so in control of their lives that we better optimize them, and if anything goes wrong, it's our fault. I'm back to that again. It's making us live two lives at once, and it's making our kids live half, right?
I think it's a self-defeating philosophy as well as parents, because our whole goal as a parent is to equip our child to leave us, right? And that's something that I struggle with every day. And just watching my kids grow up, I'm like, I'm so sad you're getting big. And I'm also so glad, you know, it's that like heartbreaking, but also like celebration as your kid grows. And our goal is to send them out in the world. I don't want my kids all living with me in their 40s. I mean, I really don't. I love them so much and I hope they're still connected with me then. But the goal is to send them out. And how am I ever going to send them out if I can't start to let go at some point, right? So, I mean, it's one thing with my toddler who's asleep in my lap, who broke her arm getting out of her crib, you know, a week ago. Like it's like, well, maybe
who's at the door? Child Protective Services.
I know, right? And that's at her age, honestly, like, yeah, I follow her around a lot of the time. And her crib is one of those times I'm like, you're supposed to be napping. So yeah, that happened. But I do follow her around a lot because she's still at the age where she's putting her finger in outlets and, you know, like she's finding all kinds of things. I don't know if she's going to swallow it or not. Who knows? I've called, you know, poison control half a dozen times with her, and she is like my most accident prone child. Seeing her climb on the table, you know, 2 days after she got her splint, I'm like, this is why you were the first one to break your arm. But also, you know, with my 6-year-old, he is getting so independent. And it is to the point where, you know, like I said, I'm thinking about, well, if I want to know where he is, or I want to be able to contact him, then I need to find a way where I can trust him to give him that freedom. So, you know, if I'm going to be letting him run around the property and I don't feel comfortable with that, maybe we need to find a way like the ham radio thing so that he can have that independence. And, you know, yeah, we can communicate, but that way it's not, I don't know. I don't have to go with him, you know.
Give him a bell. Something terrible.
There you go. Yeah.
Bell, right?
Or didn't. Yeah.
I don't know.
My mom used to have it. She had a triangle and she'd hit it and then we'd all come running. So yeah, I just think, you know, we have to find ways of letting go. And
right.
If we don't, then we're gonna just be trapped in, I don't know, what are we gonna do when our kids exit college? Like, well, I don't know. I don't trust you to get your own job yet. Do I need to go with you to the interview?
Right.
Well, one area we've been talking about physical control and physical like tracking, but yeah, one area that, I mean, my kids aren't really interested in riding their bikes down the street and exploring the world. The world that they're exploring is the internet. You know? And so that's,
which is totally safe, by the way. Like, the internet is totally,
well, and the reason is because that's one area where they have so much freedom. They can explore the world, they can learn things, they can meet people. Our daughter discovered Discord on her own, and she's joined all the channels and met all these friends. And
how old is your daughter?
She's 10 now. But she started doing this like a couple of years ago, and I didn't know she had Discord. I didn't know all these people she was talking to. It was news to me, you know. But she figured out how to make her own friends, how to, you know, all this stuff. The world's at her fingertips, just at her desk, you know. And we pretty much do unlimited screen time. We do have them shut him off at nighttime just so we can all sleep. Right. Because like sleep is important in our family. But otherwise, we don't restrict like the websites or or check in who they're interacting with, or, you know, all this stuff. And they don't really feel the need to tell us. I mean, they only tell us if they're excited about something, you know. And but Yeah, but we are definitely
but
seem like the exception to the rule. Like most of the
Yeah.
families we interact with is like they limit screen time, they limit what they do on screen.
Except even then, like you're going back and saying like what one reason kids aren't playing outside, and we've noticed this a lot, is because no one else is letting their
no
kids
one
play
else is out there.
Right,
Yeah,
so let me-
they'd be out there all the
So
time.
this is
Right.
this is like, unfortunately for us, even though like we would let our kids like go around the neighborhood and do all sorts of things if there were other kids doing it and they wanted to, but it's like the one place right now are like Roblox and like these different like kid-friendly areas where the kids have online have basically made these little like adult-free zones where they're able to interact. And it's like it's fascinating to see that happen.
And on Roblox they play adult games, or I mean they, you know,
right. Now they can do
they're
a
getting
whole
jobs and earning money, and I mean like this is
well, I think that also shows you, you know, the drive for kids. I mean, it's like water again. It will seep into where it can. So, you know, I work with Peter Gray, whose book is the greatest book ever, and I'm putting it in the chat, even though everybody probably has read it already. It's called Free to Learn by Peter Gray. And he always quotes a study that was done of kids online, asking them, okay, you're playing online now. Would you rather be playing online or would you rather be outside playing with your friends? And 80-something% of the kids said outside with my friends. But of course, there is no outside with friends. So Peter came up with this idea, and we promote this. And I feel like I'm talking to the wrong group because none of you seem to be in a normal American school. But if you were, I would recommend you recommend this to the school, which is to start a Let Grow Play Club, just the wording, but so that it sounds like it's something. But really it is to keep the school open before or after school, or preferably both, for mixed age, no devices, loose parts, free play. And that's when, you know, the kids from K through 6 are just all running around outside. I just went and watched one like 2 weeks ago. And you know, you think that like kids need a soccer coach to play soccer. No, there were 15 boys. It was only boys who did it. Went and played their own game of soccer, and you didn't hear screaming or crying, or, you know, it was just they were playing. They were perfectly capable of something that people have always been perfectly capable of until we started telling them they had to be in a league of playing soccer. And then there were kids on hula hoops and drawing with chalk and playing with these large fuzzy dice. And it was just so great. And there's an adult there for legal purposes, but they don't organize the games, they don't make suggestions, they don't solve the problems, they don't solve the spats. And that is something that I would like to see more of. You know, I'm sort of agnostic about screens and screen time. I really don't know what's the best. I work with somebody who says they're great. I work with somebody who says they should be, you know, exploded and sent into outer space. So if you could get a place, and I think of it as like a wildlife preserve where kids, you've preserved our old childhood in that space where the kids are just playing, that's really important. And I'm going to ask you guys, since I need help, like think of ways to get more schools to do this, because schools will offer chess and theater and Mandarin and mandolin, and they will not offer free play as an option because it seems like that's pointless, or who would pay for that, or, you know, that's a waste of time. And it's not.
Here we go. You bill it as historical reenactments.
That's a good idea.
You're reenacting historical childhood play.
Right. Somebody called it, yeah, that's not a bad idea. Oh, wait, I just wrote that. I meant to write that in my own notes. Yep. Historical reenactments. You can tell I'm taking notes the whole time. Yeah, historical reenactments. Somebody came up with the other day. It was like an intervention, they called it, or something, or, you know, you have to give it some serious, scary name for people to think of it as not just fun, because just fun, my God, you know, what are you wasting their time with that for?
It's the same with homeschool parents. Is like, I mean, we go to this like weekly homeschool track thing. I'm like, all the kids want to go, not because they're interested in track, but because they're interested in other kids. And they get a little bit of time to play together when they're not just running, you know? And I'm like, all we need, but homeschool parents are the same. They're not going to take the time out of their day and put something on the schedule that's just letting kids play, you know? So I've been brainstorming, like, if we were to do something like the track thing, like, and just do it for like 10 minutes, and then the rest of the time the kids could play, that's like all you need is an excuse, some kind of excuse to make the adults happy. And then you just let the kids.
Well, you could call it, I mean, so we do keep trying to figure, it's like, is it SEL time? Is it, you know, intellectual calisthenics? Is it just, you know, I did a class in New York City here called I Won't Supervise Your Kids. And I said, if you want, you know, your kids to learn leadership and compromise and how to make friends and social skills, have them come to me at 3:30 in the afternoon on Wednesday here in Central Park. And then they can all meet each other, and then they can play, and I'll be at Starbucks. It's just trying to come up with a way of framing fuck around and find out time. Yeah, good luck. There's something to be said for shocking, but there's something to be said for intellectual mumbo jumbo that I'm trying to figure out. Like a way, somebody came up with a better name the other day. It wasn't. Maybe it was that it's an intervention. That's what it was. Yeah.
This is all.
Right, it's an anxiety intervention.
Yeah, this is all a little bit sad though. It's so pessimistic about adults. Like they just can't be made to believe that it's valuable to just play. Like that's so sad.
But it's not pessimistic, I can say, because it's realistic. I try not to be a pessimist, but having tried to get, I mean, really, I was just at the conference of PE and health teachers, and a couple of them got it. And then everybody else started thinking, what could go wrong? And it's like, when I said, you know, like a couple hours after school, and this one teacher said, a couple hours, we can't stand the fact that school ends at 3 o'clock and the extracurriculars don't start till 3:20, because then we have them doing nothing for 20 minutes.
Wow. That language, we have them doing nothing.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
that is
They could-
a total adult centric world. I mean, that's, we have them doing
Right.
nothing.
Also, what's nothing? Who decided that playing is nothing, and it's only something when they're in, you know, lacrosse, right?
Yeah, this idea actually,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just this is definitely an idea I'm interested more in, just the idea of this Let Grow Play Club. We have a school right across the street, and my kids are always so sad because they have all this play equipment, but the school's always locked. So, you know, taking them across to use it, we can't get in.
You mean a playground? Literally, you can't get into a playground?
Yeah. So, and we are homeschooled, so they, you know, they can't be there during school hours, but afterwards, yeah, I would love to just like go across and like just let them play. So yeah,
New York City under Mayor Bloomberg, he did that. He sort of, you know, opened the gates of all the playgrounds and said, this is play area. You know, this is not something just for school. This is for the city.
Great.
Yeah, but then there's the parents there. I mean, or at playgrounds, I mean, because we go to playgrounds and the helicopter parents, right? So actually we have a homeschool co-op where just as an example, like, and there were like 3 different parents watching the kids play at this playground. So there weren't even as many parents as usual, right? Usually there's like
it's like one-on-one.
2 adults for
right.
But in this case, there were just a few of us, and I was watching this little boy. He might have been like 4, and he had this one big stick and this handful of little sticks, and he was like trying to throw the little sticks at the other boys, and he was chasing them with the big stick. And it was like a game. I mean, they were playing. They invented a game. Yeah, where he was a hunter with a stick or something, and they were running away from him. The kids he was chasing were all bigger than he was, you know. And I'm watching him, and he even caught one of the boys once, and he kind of tapped him with the stick and said, "I got you," you know. So he even caught him, and he just kind of tapped him, and then he kept chasing people. It was a fine game. But then one of the other moms saw this little boy with sticks running around and immediately grabbed him and said, no, don't chase people with sticks. I'm like, she didn't even take the time to watch what was happening. You know, she just saw a boy with sticks and said, no, put him down. And I'd been sitting there watching him for like 5 minutes. It was perfectly fine, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, it's just the adults get in the way.
You should grab a stick, Marta, and go after the.
Yeah, you should chase her around.
There we go.
So that's why we say have it as a Let Grow Play Club, where there's an adult there who knows to intervene only if somebody is hurt, really.
Yeah,
And
I
if
think
somebody comes up and says,
yeah, we'll look into that because like I said, we've actually talked about doing that at our house, or like I mean, or if we
Yeah,
can
so-
get another facility, but like we definitely we see the need, and if we go with like your program, then it does lend an air of legitimacy too. Like, I think that
and we're
does
trying
help.
to be so legit.
That
We have
really helps.
professors. We have professors up the wazoo. Our board is like professor heavy. So yeah.
Perfect. Great.
Right. We have an evolutionary psychologist, social psychologist, a psychiatrist. I mean, so
Yeah.
Great.
all right. You know, I have something to do at 2. So ask me any questions, and then I'm going to beg you for your help, and then we'll wrap up if that's okay. Is that okay?
I have one question.
Yeah.
I just don't know if anyone here's heard of this philosophy called taking children seriously. Has that come across anyone's radar?
Taking what?
Taking children seriously. It's basically it's worth looking up. It's a kind of an extreme version of freedom. Basically, there's just no coercion for the kids at all, and which is like it'll end up sounding like a little bit insane to most parents at first, because you sort of end up doing it a lot in your life. You know, brush your teeth, blah 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 blah. But like basically, it's like you take away coercion as a tool that you have in almost all cases, and what you do then you have to figure out how to get the same things. Like, so if you want your kid to brush their teeth, well, you better be able to convince them, right? And you basically just think of kids not as entities to be instructed, but instead as fully rational, intelligent people who just don't know as much yet. So you're just giving them new information that they don't have. And if you give them information and they don't believe you, it might be because you're wrong, or it might be because you haven't given them the right information yet, right? And you're going to just keep doing that. So it's more work in that sense. But we were talking earlier about, trying to prepare your kid in the long run to be independent or whatever, and sort of the extreme version of that. It's interesting. I don't know. I'm not sure where I am on it yet, but I think it's a very interesting thing to think about.
I know a few parents who practice that, but from like an outside perspective, it wasn't really working that well. I felt, but that could be because maybe they're not they didn't find the non-coercive way to help their kids learn something yet. But it's like just one and is one from my end. But it is an interest. At least it's interesting to think in a different way about how to help kids.
Yeah, I mean, it's a framing. It's kind of a framing trick, right? It's like, well, if I can't, it's so easy to just tell your kid what to do, right? It's like especially when they're used to you doing it, then you could just go move them through their day, right? But like, if you take that away, okay, now you have a different problem to solve, right? And like, maybe sometimes you end up telling them what to do. They're going to run out in the street. You gotta stop them, whatever, right? But maybe not, right? Maybe you can have a conversation that's more constructive than that. So.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of my philosophy of like parenting. Like for everything I try to explain to my daughter, like why, and like sometimes she kind of catches on me not having a good reason why we shouldn't do something, and like usually in those cases I let her win, because like if I don't have a good, like, I don't know, why can't I eat a sweet right now, right? And then like I don't have a good reason why not, so okay, fine, you get a sweet. And like I find those cases a lot of the time, and I think it's working pretty well. I wouldn't say that I'm super strict following that. Like sometimes, certain things are like that, but I can think of one. Like for example, right now she's right there. But for example, right now I'm just trying to teach her to like brush her teeth every morning, because she does it only every evening. And like I'm just trying to get her to do it every single morning. And it's kind of been a process. She's super stubborn. So I haven't been able to convince her.
Hi. Where are you guys? Exactly. What country are you in? What country?
I'm in Hungary.
Oh, you're in Hungary. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. But I'm Venezuelan and Italian, so it's a bit of a mixed bag.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. If you take the time to explain why, it depends on the age as well. Like if you have a 2-year-old, that's pretty tough. Like at that point, you have to kind of convince them in other ways. But after they start learning and talking and being able to kind of follow basic logic, it becomes easier and easier to convince them using kind of basic logic. You have to brush your teeth because you are getting adult teeth and they're gonna go bad and fall out or whatever. And like she understands that. So like slowly.
No, I find it in practice, we end up like, I end up looking things up with my son a lot because I start saying something, I realize I don't really have that great a reason. I don't really know. And then we're like, okay, well, let's go look this up together and find out if what I'm saying makes any sense at all. And sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it does. And eventually we're at the abstract for a scientific paper about teeth brushing, right? And like, is there actually much backing for 2 times a day versus 1? I don't know. I'm assuming that. But like, that seems like a useful process too, to like have them see you, have to look things up yourself and be wrong and all sorts of things like that, right? It's like you're not a godlike figure then.
You're still pretty godlike. I'm just putting
Well,
something.
I like what you're saying, Lenore, about it's not so much about like what parenting style you do. It's about doing less parenting, or about
It's about giving them more independence. It boils
Exactly,
down to
right.
that. More free time.
I mean,
free
that
play.
helps me as a parent, because this is like, instead of like trying to like micromanage my parenting, it's more just like, oh, okay, it's okay to let them have time without me.
It's
Not just
great to
okay,
let
but
them
it's necessary.
It's
No.
not only, yeah, it is necessary. And anybody who's thinking back has told me stories about when they were kids, whether they did something by themselves or they were running in the woods, or they developed an interest in ham radios, or they went downtown when their mother would have said no, or they climbed a tree. Every one of you has had a story about something that you did by yourselves without your parents, and you're grateful for it. And you remember to this day, why would we take that away from our kids? Right? So, all right, I gotta go. Thank you this is such an international gathering, which is fun for me. And as you'll see, I put into the chat box here that I need you guys, I need people who understand this idea. And Nat, I think you summed it up pretty well. It's not even a question of how you do every little thing. It's just making sure that some of the time your kids are figuring stuff out on their own. That's actually helpful for me to frame it that way. Because it's like, am I a follower of attachment parenting or this parenting or that parenting? It's like, I don't know, and it's always hard for me to remember all the rules for them anyhow. So this is it. But it's not unparenting. It's some time when the kids are independent of us, right? It's not unparenting. You can be very strict. You can be, you can use spanking even. I mean, you just, you determine how you're parenting, but just some of the time, you're not with your kids so that they learn how to figure some stuff out on their own. That's it. Okay. So
well, thank you, Lenore, so much. It was a pleasure having you here. And
yeah, this
see
is fun
you
for me.
online.
So thanks. You will. Okay. Spread the word. And if you have questions, obviously I'm Lenore at letgrow.org. Okay. Bye, guys. Thanks for your stories.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. And